But for Palestinians, well, let's just say that even Israel's own leading human rights organizations, one of which is called Bestselling, the other one is called Yesh Din, have said that Israel is practicing apartheid.
Welcome back to The Unknowns. My name is Charlie Stone, and today we have Peter Beinart, who is a professor, author of many books, including Being Jewish After the Destruction of Gaza. Peter, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Tell me about this. What? First of all, you in my learnings, you're an observant Orthodox Jew, correct? What does it mean to be Jewish? Let's just pause after the destruction of Gaza. What does it mean to be Jewish?
Well, that's a little bit of a complicated question. Judaism is, I would say, a religion in the way that Christianity and Islam are religion, but Jews are also a people. So in some ways, you can think of Judaism as being like a cross between a combination of both being Catholic and Italian, which is to say you could be Jewish even if you're an atheist because you believe you're a member of this people, this nation, right? But there are many Jews for whom also Judaism is actually a set of religious law and religious obligation.
In Israel, they're just not all Jews from Europe. They're Jews from all different places in the world. Can you give me a sense of like the state of Israel and where have Jews come from to settle in Israel?
Sure, that's a great question. So, I mean, there were always Jews in what became Israel. And then the Zionist movement, starting in the late 19th century, began bringing Jews from Europe, mostly from Eastern Europe. And then particularly in the late 1940s and early 1950s, you had a large influx of Jews from the Middle East or North Africa, Morocco, Iraq, Yemen, Iran, those countries. So now Israeli Jews, I would say, are kind of roughly 50% of European descent and roughly 50% from the modern Middle East.
And from your perception, I mean, you've gotten a lot of blowback, right? Whether well-deserved or not, we'll discuss that. But like the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, was that a overall good thing? Do you agree with that? Would you have said, I want to vote for that?
No, I think the problem with the creation of the State of Israel in 1948 as a Jewish state was that it was only possible through an act of mass expulsion of Palestinians because there were simply too many Palestinians around to create a Jewish state. The only way you could create a state with a large Jewish majority was through an act. And it wasn't just how many Palestinians they were there, it was also that they were living on most of the land. So the only way in which you could create a state with a large Jewish majority where Jews were living on most of the land was through this act of mass expulsion. I totally understand why many Jews at that time and today believed in the idea of a Jewish state. But I think that Jewish state was it also a terrible, terrible kind of crime against the Palestinian people, and it laid the groundwork for a lot of the violence and conflict and suffering we've seen since.
What would have been your pathway at that point?
It would have been to work towards what I support now, which was an equal binational state, a state that allowed Jews and Palestinians to live together equally under the law.
So in your estimation, what is the level of freedom in the current state of Israel? From freedom of speech, excellent or horrible? From treating people with equal rights, wonderful or horrible? How would you give them a grade?
For Israeli Jews, I'd give them an A-, pretty darn good. But for Palestinians, well, let's just say that even Israel's own leading human rights organizations, one of which is called B'Tselem, the other one is called Yesh Din, have said that Israel is practicing apartheid, right? So that's a pretty low grade for Palestinians.
What is the arguments that come at you, I think, from all sides, right? As other Jews that are like, Peter, stop it. Just give me some resonance of what are the most powerful arguments that they bring to you? And you're like, I have a little bit of a hard time answering that. Well,
I mean, these are arguments that I've been involved in for a long time. So they're very familiar arguments to me. I think that at its core, at the basic argument would be, unless Jews rule, Jews will not be safe. I think that's the core of the argument, that Jews have to be in control of this country or else Jews are going to be in danger.
You had an interesting quote in your book. It was something, we are not history's permanent virtuous victims. It seems, if you look at history, that there's something about being a Jew and being Jewish that it's constantly being persecuted. Is that an accurate assumption? I mean, throughout history.
Well, I mean, Jewish history is long and varied, but there is a tremendous amount of persecution. There's no question about that. But in Israel and Palestine today, the circumstances are very different, right? Because in Israel and Palestine today, it's not like Jews are not the legal inferiors like Jews were in the Russian Empire or in Nazi Germany. Jews are actually legally superior. So the status that Jews enjoy in Israel and Palestine today is a little bit more like the status that white Southerners enjoyed under Jim Crow segregation, or that white South Africans enjoyed under apartheid, or that Protestants in Northern Ireland enjoyed before the Good Friday Agreement in Northern Ireland.
But if you were to draw the line around Israel's borders, even in 67, 73, I mean, they've been attacked, they've repelled invasion. October 7th, they were invaded. Is the argument that you're superior, you're fine, you're safe, is that really an argument when there has been evidence of constant either missile invasion, terrorism against Israel?
My argument is that Israeli Jews and Palestinians live alongside each other, and so their safety is mutually interdependent, right? This was the point that Martin Luther King made about white and black Americans, that they were woven into one garment of destiny. And so my point is that when you deny people basic human rights, basic freedoms, then you're imposing a lot of violence on them, and that violence also endangers you. So if we look at October 7th, the horrifying event of October 7th, where civilians were, in addition to soldiers, were killed, people were taken captive, some of them are still captive. It's important to understand the condition of Gaza on October 6th, right? Gaza was not an independent country that crossed a border. Gaza was under Israeli control. It's a little bit like, if we go back to our history, imagine most of the people from Gaza are refugees. They're people whose families were expelled from what's now Israel in 1948. So it's a little bit like if we imagine a Native American reservation in the 19th century, where people have been pushed off their lands into this tiny area. Gaza is only half the size of New York City. And then they break out of that and they do a terrible thing and they kill men, women, and children, right? Doesn't make it right, but if we're going to make sure everyone is safer, we have to understand the context and Gaza was not an independent, it wasn't like an army coming from Mexico attacking the United States.
Well, in 2005, right, Hamas is elected the representative body of Gaza, but people voted to have Hamas, to have Hamas represent them. And lots of aid was provided, both from Israel to some extent and others, to shape or to help Hamas and the people and the Palestinians to rebuild that area. I mean, there's evidence that some of that money was used for tunnels and missiles and all that. Now, it just seems a little bit weird to say Hamas, nobody could help them, and so they had to do something.
I think the history is really important. So in 2005, Israel withdrew its soldiers and settlers from Gaza, but it maintained control of Gaza because it controlled all the airspace and the sea border and with some help from Egypt, all of the land borders. It controlled the population registry, right? And it actually erected a perimeter inside the Gaza Strip, which was off limits to Palestinians, right? Then in 2006, Palestinians hold parliamentary elections, and in the parliamentary elections, Hamas wins a plurality of the vote and a majority of the seats, and they do so because Fatah has been in power, the opposition, for 10 years, and there's a lot of corruption. The exit polls show that the number one and two reasons people vote for Hamas is corruption and lack of law and order. In fact, the polling showed the majority of Hamas voters in 2006 supported the two-state solution. And then you have this now, and then Hamas says it wants to go into government in coalition with Fatah, with Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian leader. And so what the United States and Israel do is say, no, we are not going to allow you to be part of a Palestinian government unless you accept Israel, right? And so they don't accept those conditions. In fact, the Israeli government itself, under Benjamin Netanyahu, doesn't accept those conditions. The Israeli government doesn't support a two-state solution. And so what Israel does is it tries to go in with the U.S. help to the U.S. basically funds some people to try to overthrow Hamas on the ground. That fails, and then Hamas ends up taking power in Gaza, and a blockade is imposed. And you're right. Some aid does go in. You're totally right. And some of that aid is definitely used for military purposes. But Gaza is also shut off from the world in what Human Rights Watch calls an open-air prison, right? And so there's not fresh water, there's not electricity. The unemployment rate is 70%, right? And so the question is, was that a good response? by Israel to this election, I think it was actually a very counterproductive response that's actually made Israel less safe.
But Hamas was the government in charge during that time, right? That didn't invest in infrastructure, did not try to solve the problems of water, did not try to broker.
I mean, I'm not trying to defend Hamas. Hamas is an oppressive Islamist group. Frankly, the Fatah, who controls in the West Bank, Mahmoud Abbas, he's also very repressive, right? But this, again, it's worth thinking about Gaza as a large prison, right? So because you have no access of getting in and out or sending goods in and out without Israeli permission, and that's very, very highly controlled. So even if you had a good government in Gaza, the capacity to do economic development in a prison is really limited.
There are other nation states around, like Egypt, right, who also controls a border with Gaza. What should they have done?
Right. So great question. So there is one crossing, the Rafah crossing, which is between Egypt and Gaza. Even there, Israel has some control over what comes in and out. Again, Israel controls the population registry. So imagine if you're going into an airport and they look on your computer system. You can't get in and out of Gaza unless you're in that Israeli computer system, even if you're coming in from Egypt, right? Egypt, since the current leadership of Sisi came in, they have their own beef with Hamas, which is because Hamas comes out of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is this kind of opposition Islamist movement. So they're pretty happy to clamp down on Hamas as well. And so they've actually worked with Israel to a significant degree to basically keep this area under blockade. And the people who've suffered as the result of this are the Palestinians. And the irony is that this blockade hasn't done anything to dislodge Hamas. What it's actually done is what is benefited Hamas, because all of the independent business class that used to exist when it was easier to move back and forth, that basically got destroyed, and Hamas took over basically the economy in Gaza.
You had mentioned, obviously, what happened on October 7th. What should have been Israel's response instead of what they did? If you were the leader of Israel, how would you deal with that?
That's a great question. And I think, what I'm going to say is going to sound crazy, because at a human level, right, and this is the same thing after 9/11, right? When you get punched in the nose, you get something terrible happens to you, painful and horrible and humiliating. The human response is to just punch back, especially if you're much, much stronger, right? Israel is 100 times, 1,000 times stronger, right? So just like the United States, that was what we did after 9/11, right? But the problem with what Israel has done, before I say what I think they should have done, is that they've destroyed Gaza, most of the buildings, hospitals, agriculture, schools, bakeries destroyed. And you know what? Hamas is still there. Hamas is still there. In fact, they have tons of new recruits because they recruit from families of people that Israel has killed. And they're going to have a lot of new weapons. You know why? Because they're actually assembling weapons from the weapons that Israel dropped on them, just like the Viet Cong did when we were fighting Vietnam. So my response would have been to recognize that this is not fundamentally a military problem. It's a political problem. You're denying Palestinians their basic freedoms. And if you deny people their basic freedoms, you're imposing violence on them. And some group of them, just like those Native Americans in the 19th century, are going to respond with violence against you. So you have to give them a pathway to freedom. And I think Israel could have had various different things it could have done. It could have let Marwan Barghouti out of jail. He's the most popular Palestinian leader. He's not an Islamist. It could have started withdrawing settlements deep in the West Bank that for Palestinians are a visible sign of the fact that they live under occupation and they're not going to get their freedom. It could have done things to respond politically, because this is a political problem fundamentally. It's not a military problem.
In the last 20 years, was there a particular moment where you were proud of what Israel's government did?
I have a great deal of love and connection to Israeli Jews and Israeli Jewish society and many aspects of that society. But if you're talking about the government over the last 20 years, there's not a lot. Well, I guess I would say in 2007, 2008, I just in under that 20-year mark, I think Ehud Olmert at that moment he didn't have much time in power because he was on his way out because of corruption. But I think Olmert was actually trying to negotiate towards a Palestinian state. So I would say that I like what Olmert did.
All right. Well, sketch for me just how do we develop, if your wish is granted, is it one state that is ruled both by Palestinians and Jews, or is it two states? And where do these two states occur?
So the traditional idea has been the two states would occur somewhere near the 1967 lines that Israel conquered in 67. So the Palestinians would have a state in East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. I don't think that's possible anymore. I think Israel is just too deeply entrenched in those areas. So the solution that I would favor would be one equal state, a binational state. It would represent both of the peoples, and people would live equally under the law. And a lot of people, including many Jews, as you know, think that idea is crazy and super dangerous, right? But this is the principle that we, I think, believe in the United States, right? That people should be treated equally under the law, even though we're a very diverse country, people from a lot of different backgrounds, and we believe that we're all safer if we're treated equally under the law.
I don't mean to get too personal, but when you go to your temple, do other people that are there, do you hear whispers? Do you have people pointing? Like, what is your burden by articulating some of these views amongst American Jews?
Well, these are really deeply held views, and so there are definitely people who very, very, very strongly disagree with me, and they make those views known. And it has been tough on some of my friendships. But I don't know if you're a religious person, but for me, when I go to a synagogue, as I did last night, as I will again tomorrow, it's not about politics. It's about my relationship with God, my effort to live according to Torah, and the joy and meaning that I find in prayer and in religious study. And thank God, like I have a lot of people who share that same impulse. And so we might disagree in politics, but that's what comes first.
Question for you. What has made the Jewish faith and traditions and cultures survive? What is the essence of being a Jew that has allowed Jews to survive under persecution and in some thrive?
That's such a great question, Charlie. It's not an easy question to answer, but I think my answer would be, if you look at these books behind me, these are some of the tractates of the Babylonian Talmud, which is the Jewish oral law, from where Jewish law comes. And I think the reason Judaism survived is that 2,000 years ago, when the temple was destroyed by the Romans, because the Jewish Israelite religion was really built around animal sacrifice at a temple, but the temple was destroyed by the Romans and Jewish sovereignty was destroyed. But Jews developed what Heinrich Heine called what has been called the portable homeland of the Jew. And the portable homeland are these books, these texts, and which are a series of laws and stories and guides about how to live. And they have some crazy, wacky stuff in there, and some stuff that would strike you and me as very even offensive. But they also have they're the compendium of centuries and millennia of Jewish thinking about how to live and how to relate to God. And I think that has sustained us even under difficult times.
I had a good friend who was Jewish. Unfortunately, he died, but his name is Dan Weil. I'll mention his name because I always think about this. He looked me in the eye at one point. He said, the reason the Jews have survived under persecution is that to become a man, you had to be literate, right? And you had to learn how to read, which is in the beginnings of some of those many thousands of tribes, being literate was not a requirement. So I thought that was interesting.
Your friend is a smart guy, and I think it's true. I think this culture could not have emerged without literacy. And actually, men, but in fact, one of the reasons that American Jews, I think, have been successful in the United States is that a very disproportionate percentage of Jewish women who immigrated from Eastern Europe in the late 19th, early 20th century were literate, more than in some other immigrant groups that came to the United States. And that, I think, had a huge impact on the educational success of Jews in the United States.
I'll go back to my first question, and then we'll wrap it up. I asked you what it meant to be Jewish, and you provided your answers. But give me a sense of, what are you advocating as a fellow Jew? How do you be Jewish after the destruction of Gaza, after October 7th? Like, what does it mean to be a Jew?
Well, I think that vis-a-vis Palestinians, I think what it means is that we believe that all human beings are created in the image of God, not just Jews. That the Torah doesn't begin with the Jewish story. We believe the Jewish story begins with Abraham, but the beginning of Genesis is not the story of Abraham and his family. It's the story of Adam and Eve and Noah. These are universal human beings, and the message is that all human beings, regardless of race, nationality, ethnicity, anything, all created in the image of God. They all have infinite value. And I think if we think about Palestinians that way, I think it leads us to a different kind of political attitude and a different kind of way that we should be supporting it. We should want Israel to act and the United States to act.
The show's called The Unknowns. Can you share anything unknown about you?
Huh. Anything unknown about me? Gosh, well, it depends on who's asking it, as it's unknown. I mean, some people might not know if they haven't read a book that my parents come from South Africa and immigrated from Cape Town just before I was born. Other people might know that I am a New England Patriots fan, and so we had some very, very good years, and now are having some very difficult years. So I feel now a lot of sympathy with those New York Jets and Giants fans who've been suffering all these years.
With that, we want to thank you for your time, Peter, and we wish you continued success.
Thanks a lot, Charlie. Appreciate it.